Author, columnist, managing editor of LibertyNation.com, podcast host and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Thomas Paine wrote, "A body of men holding themselves accountable to nobody ought not to be trusted by anybody." And this accountability is something that seems to be sorely lacking in the DC swamp and beyond. We have politicians playing interstate games to position themselves for power, leaders creating apparent truths from whole cloth, and lawmakers openly defying the Constitution, the apparatus, and the people they swore to serve. And yet our media is absent and refuses to do its most basic and important task. Is it any wonder that trust in our institutions has never been lower? Welcome to Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. And today we ask why California Governor Gavin Newsom is making TV ad spends in Florida, how the GOP appears to have embraced a more diverse approach to elections, why Joe Biden can't seem to get his economic facts right, and how New York Governor Kathy Hochul is openly defying the Supreme Court. I want to take a moment to say a special thank you to our listeners out in Amory, Mississippi on WWZQ 1240 AM. Thanks for being part of the team. And remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. With Golden State Governor Gavin Newsom running ads in Florida explaining how California is the true repository of freedom, political watchers are wondering why Governor Ron DeSantis is considered worthy of political hit ads from the opposite side of the country. To help us fathom the reasons and machinations, we're joined by author and columnist, Mr. Jeff Charles. Welcome back to the show, Jeff.
Thanks for having me on.
So I think I can think of a number of reasons why Newsom might want to do this, Jeff, but give me your take. Why is the California governor spending his cash in Florida?
Well, I think it's obvious. He's running for president, or he's looking to run for president. And with the bench that the Democrats have right now, he's probably the only one that might have a chance in 2024. Tim Donner and I have talked about this. They have nobody else. Joe Biden is not seeking re-election. I don't care what he says. Hillary Clinton, they tried to make that a thing. That's not going to happen. Andrew Cuomo blew his chances out of the water with his performance in New York and the fact that he can't keep his hands to himself. So who else do they have that might stand a chance, that might have a level of charisma? That would be Gavin Newsom. So I think he's testing the waters here.
Yeah, that could be it. I mean, it certainly seems that Joe Biden doesn't have much of a chance of winning if he decides to run. The latest gambling figures, the gambling odds came out recently. And Donald Trump is favored by the cash money bettors at 3-1 to take the White House in 2024. Ron DeSantis is in second place to take the White House in 2024. Joe Biden finishes third in a 2-horse race, which kind of explains his presidency, I think. I think that really sums up the whole thing. Now, do you think, from a wider perspective, do you think that the Democratic Party as a whole views DeSantis as a serious threat to any 2024 hopes?
You know, the thing about DeSantis is that whether he runs or not, he is a threat to them. Over the past year, he has shown that not only is he a rising star on the right, he has governed the state in a way that allows for freedom without there being the horrible death count that the left predicted under the COVID-19 pandemic. Not only that, but he knows how to take it to the left. He knows how to take it to the media. He's not timid. He's not milquetoast like Republicans are used to having. He's very aggressive, but he's very politically savvy. So everybody notes that he has all of Trump's strengths, but none of his weaknesses. He doesn't have any of that baggage, and he knows how to play the game without saying things that give the left ammo. So again, whether he runs or not, he's still a threat, even down the road. So yeah, they're very afraid of DeSantis. I mean, even when I'm looking on social media, he's like their boogeyman right now.
Yeah, his name pops up pretty much everywhere. Now, you've lived in both California and Florida, Jeff. Newsom claims in his TV ad spot that he ran in Florida that the Golden State is the true home of freedom. Now, as someone who's experienced both firsthand, what's your verdict?
Yeah, now, to be fair, I didn't live under California under the COVID-19 pandemic. I left in about 2012 or so, but the difference is huge. I mean, in California, I mean, you're not all that free. I mean, there's so many regulations when it comes to starting a business. You got that state tax, you've got all kinds of taxes. It's very expensive to live there. So, I mean, maybe if you're wealthy, yeah, it might be a freer state. But really, the only advantage that California has over Florida might be the weather for some people. And the weather here in Florida is great. I mean, I came here from Texas, so I'm used to being in a free state. So the difference is night and day. And I would imagine that with the COVID-19 pandemic, that difference is even wider. And Newsom basically laid out how he would plan to govern. He shut his state down, didn't follow his own rules, while people were living free in Florida. I mean, the difference is clear.
Yeah, that French Laundry incident, that is going to come back and haunt him again and again and again. Now, I wonder if this whole piece of political theater that was produced was not even specifically for the audience of Florida, but rather, as you point out, a grand virtue signal to potential voters around the country. I mean, if he wanted to do some good in his state, he could advertise for more U-Haul trucks to help the numerous people move out, which is what they're doing. And of course, many of those are moving to, what's that place again? What's that place, Jeff?
That would be the Sunshine State, Florida.
Oh, Florida, that's right, yeah. So is he trying to pull back taxpayers, or is he sending a grand signal across the country, trying to say, look, I can control things on both borders here? What are your thoughts?
No, this is a national message. Nobody from Florida is trying to move to California. California lost 250,000 people between 2020 and 2021. From 2010 to now, they've lost 7.5 million people. Florida's population is growing. I mean, here in Jacksonville, we're getting a lot more people. And I just moved here, and you still see more people moving in. I'm seeing license plates from California, from Texas, from other places. So people are moving to California, and they're moving away from, they're moving to Florida and moving away from California. That right there should tell you all that you need to know. But even the other metrics don't work in Gavin Newsom's favor. This is not a good fight for him to be picking right now.
So we reckon that Gavin Newsom is going to be running for president in 2024 for the Democratic Party if Joe Biden decides not to run, I guess, and Kamala Harris can be convinced that she may be more of a liability than anything else. What do you think is going to happen on the Republican side, Jeff? Do you think that Donald Trump is going to throw his hat in the ring, or are we going to see DeSantis? Are we even going to see a primary field? What do you reckon?
You know, I still think that all indications suggest that Trump plans on throwing his hat in the ring. I would imagine unless something major happens or something crazy happens that he decides not to run, that might be the case. But right now, I think he plans to run. I mean, the rumors are saying that he's anxious to announce. He's chewing at the bit here. So I think he is. And if he does run, we're not going to have much of a primary field. I don't think that DeSantis will run if Trump runs, because DeSantis is politically savvy. He's reading the room. He knows what the polling says. So, yeah, I think if Trump runs, he's going to be the nominee.
Okay, yeah, I mean, all the polls point to him winning the Republican primary field. But do you think that that almost fait accompli will prevent people like Liz Cheney and perhaps even Mitt Romney, based on his recent op-ed in The Atlantic, from trying their luck?
You know, there's something funny about the Never Trump crowd, the ones that suffer from TDS. They have a total lack of self-awareness. So I wouldn't put it past Liz Cheney to run for president. I actually expect it. And she's going to make an utter fool of herself. I don't know about Mitt Romney. He may have learned his lesson. But Liz Cheney, I mean, this whole Never Trump crowd, they're still trying to maintain that relevance. They're still the establishment. Nobody wants them. But the problem is that they don't realize that yet. So, yeah, I could see Liz Cheney running and getting spanked.
Not an image I'd like to dwell on. Jeff Charles, thank you ever so much. We'll be back with Jeff Charles in just a short moment discussing diversity on the GOP ticket. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back with author and columnist Jeff Charles getting into the new GOP Diversity Push. So, Jeff, it seems that political parties are almost desperate to try and diversify how their candidates look, where they're from, their backgrounds, their race, gender, that kind of thing. And it's long been a staple for the Democrats to do this. But it seems that the Republican Party is also making, let's call it, inroads into this. What are the numbers that we're looking at as we approach the midterms?
Yeah, so as far as black candidates, they've got at least about 180 running right now. Some have even won their primaries, and some, still remain to be seen. But this is a record number of black candidates. I mean, we're seeing a lot of wins with Latinos as well, or actually specifically Latinas who are winning their primary races, and they will probably win their ultimate races. I mean, in Texas, in predominantly Hispanic areas, you have Republican females who are winning and doing very well. So when I see this happening, I'm thinking the word that comes to mind is finally, the Republican Party has actually started reaching out to minority voters in a real way. And I'm cautiously optimistic about what we're going to see in November.
Okay, now, is this a winning strategy, though? Choosing candidates or promoting candidates or getting behind candidates based on, let's be fair, their skin color. Is that a winning strategy?
Sure. I mean, when you look at ethnicity, when you look at culture, people want to see other people who look like them. I mean, you hear the left use the term representation. There's some truth to that. I mean, if you look at a party and it's all one thing, then you might not feel like you really belong there. But when you see more black candidates running and getting support, more Hispanic candidates running and getting support, that's going to pique that interest. Oh, if more people from my community are voting Republican, maybe there's something I should be paying attention to. We're all built this way. It's a tribal thing that's part of human nature. So as much as we like to say we don't like identity politics, I think on the conservative side, we actually do. We just don't like doing it the way the left does it. So I think this is a good thing because now the GOP will look more like what America actually looks like.
So the left has been doing this for a long time anyway, but now that support's ebbing away. As we saw, as you point out in South Texas, I believe it was Mayra Flores who won she's actually won a seat and will be going on in the special election and will be going on again in November into the midterms there. But the Democrats have been doing this kind of representation of what America actually looks like. They've been doing that for quite a long time. But it seems that Hispanics and black voters are abandoning that for policy. So how do you square that circle?
Yeah, what's happening, I mean, and I do think that the efforts on the part of the GOP have helped, but I think more than that, it's the fact that Democrats have been messing everything up. They've been fouling up every single problem that they're faced with. You see what we're dealing with gas prices, inflation, economic issues, and their answer to that is to focus on January 6th. I think minorities have finally gotten fed up and they're more willing to consider Republicans. There was a Wall Street Journal poll that came out that suggested that more Black Americans, more Hispanics are actually willing to support a Republican candidate over a Democratic candidate. So right now it's up to the Republican Party to take advantage of that because really this is based more on disillusionment than so much saying, oh, I just love what the Republican Party stands for. No, I think they're being given a chance. So it's going to depend on what Republicans do with that chance.
That's a very interesting point you bring up, especially where you mentioned the January 6th show trial thing that's happening, because you do have a significant number of Republicans are fully behind the January 6th committee, the findings of it, people like Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger. And do you think that's putting off many Republican voters?
You mean from supporting Republicans or?
Yes.
No, I don't think so at all. I think most Republicans see that for the sham that it is. The only people that are being convinced by it are the people who are already convinced. I mean, you have that never Trump wing in the Republican Party. They didn't even need the hearings for them to go against what's going on or to not support Republicans. So I don't really think it's doing much at all.
Let's just talk a little bit about what policies appeal to certain segments of voters. So let's put aside the policies that the left are promoting, which of course appear to be, let's have high gas prices, and look at the ones that more conservative voters might be wanting. Now, is there a difference between what Hispanic, Black, and traditional white voters want in terms of policy?
I don't think that there's much of a difference. I mean, we all want the same things. It's just a matter of how we get there. But I mean, every American, including Hispanics and Black people, they want to have good jobs. They want to have decent paying jobs. They don't want to be paying a ton of money at the pump. They don't want to go to the grocery store and have to take out a second mortgage on their home just to get a steak. They want things like that. Education. Most Black people, when polled, support school choice. The party that they vote for in general does not. And yet you have conservative candidates out here saying, we want to give you choices. When it comes to crime, everybody's concerned about crime, but especially Black and Hispanic people living in these areas where the crime is happening, yeah, they want people who are going to come in and crack down on crime. So I don't think that there's a huge difference, really. It's just a matter of who they think is more likely to deliver.
Right. Yeah, I see what you mean with that. I was looking at the latest numbers on issues that are important to voters. And obviously, number one's inflation. Number two is gas prices. So economy, because it's always the economy. But as you point out, schools are, I really think that's one of the fastest growing concerns for American voters across the board, regardless of party affiliation or political ideology. And the idea that children can get a proper education that prepares them for the world is really hitting home to parents. Now, the push for more school choice, but other options within schooling, such as homeschooling, that they're really coming to the forefront. Now, you and I have talked about homeschooling before, Jeff, but for those who didn't catch that show, what are the latest numbers on homeschooling?
So the rate of homeschooling and private schools and charter schools have gone up as far as attendance goes. Public schools have gone down. Especially among Black parents, which was what we're talking about here. It went from 3% to 17% of Black families who are homeschooling now after the pandemic and even after we're coming out of it. So there's a lot of different reasons for that. But when it comes to education, the public school system isn't doing so well, and people are starting to recognize that.
Yeah, I think part of the reason that there's so many more people homeschooling nowadays across all communities is that because of the pandemic, they understood that they could manage that kind of life. And whether that means that one parent has to stay home or they have to arrange extended family for childcare, that kind of thing. I think that what they've realized is that I can balance this, and which kind of suggests to me that bringing your children up and giving them the education that you want them to have is the natural default position. And perhaps the public school system is more of an aberration. Yes, it's a long-standing aberration, but the idea to want to be close to your children and to help instill the values in the education that you think they should have, rather than something that's decided by committee and looks like a horse or an elephant, you know the old adage. I think that's really come to the forefront because people have realized that their ability to do something and to juggle this busy life has become apparent after the pandemic, and politicians who are willing to support them in these choices that they make for themselves, I think they're going to get a lot of support. Jeff Charles, thank you ever so much for being here. I really appreciate it. We'll speak to you soon. All
right. Thanks for having me back.
You're listening to Liberty Nation Radio, heard across the Radio America network from our flagship station in the nation's capital, WWRC in Washington, D.C. Remember, you can tune in for Liberty Nation on WWZQ 1240 AM out in Amory, Mississippi. Thank you for being here, Mississippi. Coming up later in the show, we talk liberty with Scott Cosenza on how New York's Governor Hochul is intent on ignoring the Supreme Court's Second Amendment ruling. But up next, after this short break, we dive deep into the latest economic mess caused by Joe Biden and his freewheeling Twitter ways. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
President Biden once again flubs how the markets work and gains himself some new friends by doing so, and perhaps one or two enemies. Where did it all go wrong for the man who promised to end fossil fuels? Well, we're joined by economist and author Andrew Moran to help find out the whys, the hows, and the what the hells. Welcome back, Andrew.
Thank you for having me.
So what did the president say this time? And perhaps more importantly, who stood up and took notice?
Well, once again, it was the same old nonsense for the last several months. It was him blaming everybody else except himself. This time, he was targeting, once again, mom and pop gasoline stations, telling them to cut their prices. You know, he just completely devoid of why gasoline prices are high in the first place. I mean, if he thinks that these mom and pop gas station owners are colluding and just price gouging consumers, it's a lack of understanding of what's happening in the broader energy market. Same with, his press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre. She was uttering the same thing, saying, "Oh, it's a failure of market dynamics of why this is happening." So
that market dynamics, that market dynamics thing, that came directly from Jeff Bezos, I believe, who openly criticized the president on the Bluebird platform. What did he say?
Yeah. Yeah, that's been interesting about Jeff Bezos when he's calling out the administration again, saying that it's either misdirection or a misunderstanding of what's really going on in the financial markets. He made his billions. He doesn't care anymore. So like Elon Musk, who also made his fortune by kowtowing to the government, he doesn't care. So he's just calling it for what it is, and he's absolutely right. That it's either misdirecting the American people heading into the midterms, or just they're ignorant and they don't know what's going on.
It's funny, isn't it? I've never seen Jeff Bezos described as a MAGA king until he decided to criticize Biden's energy policies. Yeah.
If I may just say one thing, I would say I would give credit to a lot of left-leaning economists or figureheads who've done a pretty okay job of calling out the administration. We've discussed this before. Former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, he's called the administration many times, particularly over the American Rescue Plan and contributing to inflation.
Yeah. Now we also had China weigh in on the subject. Can you tell us what happened there?
Yeah, so there was this Chinese journalist who belongs to China Daily EU, which is a state-owned news organization, and he was saying, "Oh my goodness, thank God a U.S. president understands what capitalism is and that it's an exploitative system." So when a communist is supporting an administration or administration policy, you should take a step back and say, "What the heck is going on?"
Biden was just fundamentally wrong in what he said. He wants gas station owners to take the hit to help the public, right? To help them recover from this insanity inflation that he helped produce through his policies. But the reality is, and I think I'm right here, that the average gas station in the US, it takes roughly 3 to 5 cents profit per gallon sold. Is that about right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The average percentage-wise is 1.4%, and if you compare it to all other industries on an average, it's 7.7%. So yeah, these gas stations aren't making their money from the fuel; they're making a lot of their money from the concession stands, the snacks, the goodies. Or if you're in Canada, you partner with Tim Hortons and sell your double doubles. But yeah, so that's where they get a lot of their money from. And also too, there are other components involved with gasoline stations, how they price. Well, in this market specifically, the refineries, that's a major component of why gas prices are so high. Refineries is you extract gasoline from the crude and then sell it back to these companies. Problem is that refineries are operating at maximum capacity. A lot of them have shut down. 6 are currently offline. So
Let me jump into that for a second, Andrew, specifically with the refineries, because wasn't that what the Keystone XL pipeline was all about? Was about transporting I believe it was sand crude from Canada down into America for the refinery purposes. So wasn't that basically the starting point of all these issues, that people couldn't do the refining that they need to do?
Yes, that is correct. However, a lot of these numbers of the refineries have gone down over the last 15 years, even before the concept of Keystone XL was conceived. And this is not just prevalent in the United States; it's prevalent in Europe and Canada. So the refineries are necessary, but the problem is that nobody expected the level of demand and the overall collapse of the broader energy market would occur. So these people were not forward thinking. They shut them down thinking that, okay, we're going to have our windmills and our solar panels, so the need for refineries will not be as immense as it was before.
You say that nobody could have predicted what would happen, but to be fair, I think several of us, when we heard Joe Biden say he will end fossil fuels, kind of saw this coming, didn't we?
No. I don't mean over the last year. You look at my articles.
The trends over the last 15.
Yeah, I can defend my record for saying I've written about this a long time. Even the start of the pandemic, I said that oil was going to touch $100 a barrel. I was absolutely right. So no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying 15 years ago, nobody could have foreseen a coronavirus pandemic. The Russia invading Ukraine, and all the and the Fed printing trillions of dollars over, a 2 year span. That's not for them. Very long-term thinking. So that's my record.
Understood, Andrew. You're absolutely in the clear. Your record is exemplary, as always, as an economics prognosticator. Now, let's talk about the oil and gas leases in Utah, because this kind of flew under the radar for many people. Now, we hear Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre and President Biden and his other spokespeople saying there's 9,000 gas leases. We do know that this is not strictly speaking true. Sure, there are 9,000 gas leases. Not all of them actually have oil and gas in them. That's the thing. It costs money, it costs investment to find out if there's stuff there. And then, of course, you've got to go through the process of finding it, extracting it at a price where you can actually make a profit, because nobody does this for free. But to shut down potential new oil and gas leases in Utah, how does this happen when we're facing a crisis that I think everybody can admit can only be solved by saying, drill, baby, drill?
Yeah, well, this whole thing is interconnected, because the reason why they said they canceled the lease was because of a technicality whereby one of the oil wells that was or natural gas wells that was connected to one of the leases was actually already plugged by the U.S. government. But in reality, the real reason from my standpoint was that they wanted to appease the environmental groups who are planning litigation to stop that from happening. And you see this all over the country. These environmental groups, they were the reason why the Alaska. The government says it was because not of interest, but it was because of the environmental organizations and their lawsuits that led to the shutdown of the Alaska oil and gas leases. And now the U.S. government, they're planning several other auction sales for oil and gas leases in Western states. The problem is that these environmental groups are already warning, we're going to start litigation soon, and then the U.S. government is just going to cave and appease them, and then you're going to have the exact same issue over and over again across the country.
Well, I think that there's a clear connection here in terms of methodology with the immigration crisis at the southern border and the oil and gas lease auctions. If people are motivated enough to launch lawsuit after lawsuit because the government has already told you that it's willing to cave, I quote Joe Biden again, I will end fossil fuels, then really they're just setting themselves up for failure here. This is a situation that Joe Biden created with his own rhetoric and then the policies of his administration. What did he expect?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, the American Petroleum Institute and several other groups that represent the oil and gas industry, they've been saying the same thing, is that we don't have confidence that the administration or the federal government is going to have her back in court if they have to fight against these environmental groups. The API and all these other organizations, they present the same ideas of what would facilitate greater production and exploration. A lot of this is a permitted easing process. A lot of them is, stop this whole rhetoric of ending fossil fuels. A lot of them is just reducing red tape. And if I may add one thing too, you made a point about the whole oil and gas leases. What's funny is that the Bureau of Land Management, if you read some of their statements in certain states, they say that, we approve all these leases, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to lead to production. They said that 1% of oil and gas leases will lead to output. So you can say this whole 9,000 number as much as you want, but the proof is in the pudding, is that it's not going to necessarily lead to this whole massive amounts of crude output. So stop with this whole 9,000. It's nonsense by now.
So 90 would be the correct number there. Andrew Moran, thank you ever so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
In just a short moment, we'll be back talking liberty. Just how did Governor Hochul think she would get away with defying the Supreme Court? Don't touch that dial. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
In the wake of the sweeping opinion from the Supreme Court regarding gun rights in America, one would expect executives across the nation to be falling in line and following the law. Well, maybe not quite all executives. In New York, Governor Kathy Hochul has come out swinging and signed up on a series of laws that, let's say, go against the spirit of the SCOTUS opinion. To delve into the constitutionality of such a move, we're joined by Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, man about town, and host of the excellent Uprising podcast, Mr. Scott D. Cosenza. Welcome aboard, Scott.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure.
So, Scott, give us a broad strokes picture here. What has Governor Hochul put forward to fight
We
back?
can even expand it a little bit beyond Governor Hochul. This is liberal. So the jurisdictions that are affected by this are ones where there's effectively no Republican competition for leadership. So these are lockstep Democrat jurisdictions. We're going to, premier New York to be sure, but also New Jersey, Maryland, Hawaii, and some other states.
Delaware. Let's not forget Delaware.
Yes, absolutely. How could we? And basically, these these leaders, Mark, they have a choice. They can take the one big L, which is to say they lost their bid to keep guns from law-abiding citizens from being able to carry them in their states, or they could do what Governor Kathy Hochul and the New York legislature are doing, and they seem to be favoring death by 1,000 cuts. Now, we saw some recent news out of Maryland, by the way, where they seem to be taking the L. Like they've recognized that the Supreme Court has declared their licensing scheme unconstitutional and violating all the rights of the citizens who live there, and they're going to adjust their licensing process by simply removing the odious portion, which is basically the discretionary review, yeah. Right? Basically the part where they say, no, we don't like you because you want to carry a gun, so we're not going to let you carry one. So New York, they have required, as we've talked about off the air, a social media review of several years, and some other fantastically odious, I think, provisions for whom they will grant a license to.
So the two big things that stood out to me on this New York situation, this Governor Kathy Hochul situation, is obviously the viewing and the reportage of social media, which I want to get to because I think that's really important. But just firstly, she's also decided that firearms can't be carried by people with a permit in a number of places. Now, this is fairly standard, I believe, across the board, across America.
Some restriction on it is standard, Mark, yes.
But what she's done is she's decided to apply this to just about everywhere that you could go other than your home and your car. How does this even
depending on where you park
muster?
your car, that may not be inadvisable under the current scheme, Mark. It seems to be blatantly illegal and unconstitutional to suggest that, and if we use the analogy of a different fundamental right, if we said, well, sure, you're free to pray to Mecca anytime you want and wherever you want, so long as you have explicit permission from a property owner to pray to Mecca. And if, by the way, if they don't give it to you or have a sign in front of their door or their hotel that says you're allowed to pray to Mecca in this hotel when you stay here, then you're not allowed to do it. We presume that you're not allowed to express yourself, even though the Constitution guarantees you, right? We're not going to let you do it unless there's an explicit grant of permission, which is what they've done. Effectively, they've made all private property in New York subject to a new regulation, which is that if you wish to allow people, business invitees, that's how the law describes somebody who may come into a business. If you wish to allow business invitees to carry a gun, you have to announce that you will let them do so, which, by the way, that's a forced speech on behalf of the business owner, right? So they may not wish to do that. You can imagine they may not wish to gum up their, what a square foot of window space in Manhattan rental real estate, shopping. What do you call it? The high streets. That's what they call it over there in
on the high streets. The prime real estate
in Manhattan. It's a lot of money. Okay, and there's just so many problems with it, Mark. This will be. In fact, we have to check our watches to see when this is going to be struck down. All these new provisions that the New York State legislature has passed into law and Kathy Hochul has signed, I think the majority of them are likely to fall under a challenge under the new standard of review the court articulated in New York State Rifle and Pistol v. Bruin.
Yeah, I was expecting challenges to already be in place on this. Now, the one element that we keep coming back to here, and I really do want to discuss, is the idea that you have to comply with the regulations to get a permit to carry. You have to provide 3 years of social media history. Now, presuming if they find another social media account that maybe you abandoned and didn't include on your form, that's disqualifying.
Oh, of course.
But here's the big thing, right? 3 years of social media history. What are they looking for, Scott?
Well, what they're looking for, listen, you have to remember back in 1911 or 21, when did whenever the Sullivan Law was introduced in New York, okay? The purpose of their licensing scheme was not to grant licenses or to review applications for licenses to determine who might be acceptable and who wouldn't. It was to deny the people the permission to carry a gun.
Yeah, it was a Tammany Hall initiative, I believe.
It was. Yeah, Mr. Sullivan was a Tammany Hall politician. He was a congressman. Corrupt New York Democrat congressman from Tammany Hall. That's who Sullivan was. But when the entire system is geared towards one goal, which is to deny licenses, without some kind of root and branch change, the DNA is still there. And of course, the desires are still there. And part of the thing that's just kind of laughable from a review perspective, all these politicians dunking on Twitter, these New York politicians, whether it's from the Manhattan borough president on up to Governor Hochul, basically saying like, well, the Supreme Court, they could say what they want, but we're going to go ahead and frustrate their will. That's not going to look very good when it comes to defending those laws in court and saying that they weren't designed for precisely what we know what they were designed for. By the way,
to frustrate the opinion of the court.
And we know it not because we're mind readers, but because that's what the people who pass the laws are telling us.
Yes, it's like OJ writing a book. I didn't kill my wife, but if I did, here's what I'd do.
If I did it.
Yeah. Now, really, with this idea that people have to hand over their social media, I think what worries most people really about any government agency having, access and permission to go through your social media is that the people who are judging you may have antithetical beliefs to you. So, for example, is somebody waving a MAGA flag considered to be a terrorist by people in New York City who have the control over gun issuance permission?
So I don't think you're wrong about your concern there. I just think that's like concern number 37 down the list when it comes to, by the way, what if I just wrote my friends letters instead of posting on Facebook? Could they be entitled by law to me reproducing every handwritten letter that I've made in the past 3 years? Like, in other words, the number of problems about this, I don't disagree with what that you've presented a problem. You have, but also there are so many others that I think are just beyond the pale. Also, if you have to turn over the keys to these accounts or disclose it in other ways, there are terms of service violations that might be mandated by the law. So New York State may mandate that you violate the law, which is the contract that you have with a social media company, by giving them access to it. This is a problem some employers have run into. So I don't know if their quick work of making a hash of the Supreme Court decision factored that into account and how they're going to get over that hurdle. Which, again, just to be clear, I don't think they're going to have to, because I think it's going to get stricken down. I think that we have seen, the Full Employment Act for lawyers in these states where they want to hold on to these restrictions, and they will be root and branch excised from the law.
Excised from the law. Let's hope so for the unconstitutional. Scott DeCasenza, thank you ever so much.
Thank you, Mark.
And that's almost all we have time for on this edition of Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I'd like to take a short moment to thank our guests, Jeff Charles, Andrew Moran, and Scott DeCasenza, and also to extend my sincerest thanks to you, the listeners out there, for being with us and making this all worthwhile. You are appreciated. My parting shot for this week. Singer Tom Jones once sung "Elusive Dreams and Schemes." I'm reminded of this ballad whenever I hear a politician tell me what he or she wants to achieve. Is it too much to ask for a step-by-step account of how something will be implemented, costed, and most importantly, measured for success or failure? If government were a private enterprise, it would have been bankrupt long ago, because it does not and will not recognize its own failures. And by ignoring said failures, continues to make them again and again. We hear such grand talk of accountability, but sadly, it's never aimed at the self. How can you hold others to account if you don't start with looking inward? Let he who is without sin write the first bill. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
We're doing it for real, really real. Liberty Nation.
And Jeff Charles, contributor for LibertyNation.com.
I think we're starting to make an impact. Liberty style, fight for freedom.
The tracking poll sponsored by Liberty Nation for Thursday.
Mentioned by Dan Bongino, Rasmussen, Jordan Peterson, and
I can
others.
do it again if you want me to.
Cited in Mark Levin's American Marxism.
I think we're starting to make a really big impact. Get noticed. We're doing it. Rock on. I'm gone.